Part 2. The largest hut in the village, the one which typically served as a meeting place, saw little use under normal circumstances. After all, the chief held absolute authority within the village, so there was hardly any need to hold meetings. Thus, it was a meeting place in name only. However, a bizarre energy filled the hut today. It was currently jam-packed with many lizard men, and the originally spacious interior was now very cramped. Apart from the warrior lizard men, the priests, hunters, elders, and the travelers Ayusu were present. They sat cross-legged on the ground, looking towards Shasuryu. As the tribe's chief, Shasuryu announced the beginning of the meeting, and then the head of the priests was the first to speak. She was an aged lizard woman, her body painted with sinister-looking white markings. Apparently they had some sort of significance, but Zayusu did not know what that significance was. Does everyone remember the clouds that covered the sky? That was magic. I know of 2 spells which can control the weather. The first is Control Weather, a spell of the 6th tier. However, that cannot be the case here, because a magic caster who could wield such magic would be a legendary figure. The other is a spell of the 4th tier, Control Clouds. Only a powerful magic caster could work such a spell, and only a fool would oppose such a person. The similarly painted priests nodded in approval from where they were lined up behind the high priestess. Zayusu understood how powerful that was, but many others could not understand how powerful the spell was even after being told that it was magic of the 4th tier. The room soon filled with puzzled muttering. The high priestess looked baffled, unsure of how to explain the situation to them. Then, she pointed to one of the lizard men. Said lizard man had a baffled expression on his face as well, and pointed to himself. Yes, you. Do you think you could beat me in a fight? The indicated lizard man hurriedly shook his head. He might be able to win if the fight was limited to weapons, but if the use of magic was also allowed, then his odds of victory were slim. No, slim did not cover it. A mere warrior like him would have no chance at all. Even so, someone like me can only use magic of the 2nd tier at best. In other words, that person's twice as strong as you, High Priestess. The High Priestess did not know who had asked that question, but she sighed and shook her head as she heard it. It isn't just being twice as strong. Anyone who can use 4th tier spells could kill our chief easily. She fell silent after qualifying her statement with, "Well, it's not a given, but it's very likely." Now that they knew how powerful 4th tier spells were, the interior of the meeting hall fell silent. Then, Shasuryu spoke again. "So what you're trying to say, High Priestess, is that I think we'd be better off fleeing. We stand no chance no matter how hard we fight." "What the hell are you saying?" An imposing-looking lizardman leapt to his feet with a bass growl. He was easily the size of Shasuryu, and he was the head warrior of the tribe. "You're telling us to run without a fight? How could we flee from mere threats? Are you retarded? I'm saying that by the time we fight, it'll be too late for us." The High Priestess jumped up as well, her angry eyes locked with those of the head warrior. Both of them began growling in low, dangerous tones. Just as the words, "powder keg," flashed through everyone's minds, a cold voice spoke. "Get a grip, both of you." The head warrior and the High Priestess blinked, like they had been struck by a bolt from the blue. Then, they turned to look at Shasuryu. They apologized, and then sat down. "Headhunter, tell me what you think. I understand the opinions of the head warrior and the High Priestess, and agree with what they have to say." Shasuryu's question was answered by a skinny lizardman. That said, calling him skinny was doing him a disservice. His build was more on the wiry than the muscle-bound side. Therefore, since there is still some time, should we not carefully observe the changes around us? The opposition says they will send an army, so it makes sense that they will encamp. That requires a lot of preparation work, so why don't we decide after seeing what the enemy does? There's no point going back and forth while we don't know anything. Murmurs to that effect could be heard in the background. Elders, I can't make a decision here. All the opinions stated have their merits. The rest is up to you, our chief. Mu. Shasuoyu's eyes shifted and met Zayusu's. His gaze seemed to convey an approving nod. Thus, with a feeling like he had been gently pushed forward from behind and perhaps into danger, Zayusu raised his hand to share his opinion. Chief, I would like to say something. The attention of all the lizard men converged on Zayusu. Everyone looked expectantly toward him. Of course, some of those eyes were filled with anger. How dare you address this, traveler? You should be glad we allowed you in here at all, came the rebuke from one of the elders. Now sit down. And there was a loud thump of a tail forcefully striking the ground. It cleaved the elder's words in half like a sharp blade. Shut up. There was a frightening undertone to Shasuoyu's voice. It was laced with the low growling any lizardmen made when they were angry. Nobody dared interrupt him when he was like this, and the tension in the hut rose like the tide. The mounting heat in the air froze solid. Just then, one of the elders spoke up. However, he had not realized that there were many reproachful looks directed at him, urging him not to cause any more problems. But Chief, you can't give him special treatment even though he might be your brother. Travelers are. Did I or did I not tell you to shut up? You. Everyone at this meeting was invited because they have some relevant insights on the issue. Is it strange to ask a traveler his opinion? But travelers are. Your chief has declared that it is fine. Or are you saying that you intend to defy my orders? Shasuoyu turned his eye from the now silent elder to the other tribal leaders. High Priestess, Head Warrior, Head Hunter, do you also think there's no point in hearing him out? There is value in Zayusu's words, the Head Warrior replied before anyone else. No warrior would reject the opinion of the one who bears frost pain. I think so too. It's worth listening to him, the Head Hunter said in a casual tone. The last was the High Priestess, who simply shrugged and replied, of course we should hear him out. Only an idiot would choose to ignore the advice of an experienced individual. The Council of Elders frowned under this barrage of mockery. Shasuoyu nodded at the replies of the three leaders, and then raised his chin to indicate that Zayusu should speak. While still seated, Zayusu said, if I had to choose between fleeing or fighting, I would choose the latter. Oh. And why is that? Because it is the only real option we have. Normally speaking, he would have to explain his reasons for saying so if the chief asked for them, but Zayusu did not elaborate. His attitude seemed to say, that's all there is. Shasuoyu cupped his chin with his hand, and he looked like he was deep in thought. Don't tell me you've realized it as well. Yeah. As Zayusu struggled to keep his thoughts from showing up on his face, the High Priestess spoke up, a discomfited expression on her face. Still, can we win? Of course. The Head Warrior shouted with an intensity that could evaporate the unease in the air, but the High Priestess merely narrowed her eyes. No, I think given our present situation, our chances of victory are very low. Zayusu answered on her behalf, denying the Head Warrior's words. And what do you mean by that? Head Warrior, the enemy should be fully aware about us, about our fighting strength. Otherwise, they would not sneer so openly at us. That being the case, if we fight them with our current strength, we will not be able to win. Then what should we do? As that thought flickered through everyone's minds, Zayusu concealed his true intentions and seized the initiative. That means we'll need to defy their expectations. Does everyone still remember that war from the past? Of course, someone replied. Nobody here was stupid enough to have forgotten the incident that had happened several years ago. Or rather, they would have remembered the fighting no matter how stupid they were. 7 tribes had occupied this marsh in the past. They were the Green Claw, Small Fang, Razor Tail, Dragon Tusk, Yellow Speckle, Sharp Edge, and Red Eye tribes. However, only 5 of those tribes remained now. That was because there had been a war which had taken many lives and wiped out 2 tribes. The cause of that war had been the inability to catch enough fish to feed their people. Eventually, the hunters were forced to leave their territory and fish outside it. Every tribe had done this. Before long, the hunters from each tribe encountered each other at their fishing spots. Since this matter concerned the food supplies of their respective tribes, they could not back down. Soon enough, arguments turned to violence, and that violence claimed lives. After that, the warriors of each tribe began traveling with their hunters to back them up, and thus battles broke out over food. The war dragged in 5 of the 7 tribes, with the Green Claw, Little Fang, and Razor Tail tribes on one side against the Yellow Speckle and Sharp Edge tribes. It became a state of total war that did not just involve their warriors but even the average male and female lizard men. After repeated all-out battles, the alliance containing the Green Claw was victorious, while the other 2 tribes were so worn down they could not function as tribes any further and disbanded. However, the tribeless lizard men were absorbed by the Dragon Tusk, who had not taken part in the fighting. The irony was that the lack of food which had led to the war was solved by the decrease in the lizardman population in the marsh, because everyone who survived now had enough fish to live on. What does that war have to do with what's happening now? Think about what our enemy said. He mentioned that this village was the second. That implies that they sent messengers to other villages, right? Oh. Murmurs of understanding rose from the crowd as they realized what Zayusu meant. In other words, you want to reform the alliance, then? No way. He's right. We should renew our alliance. Like the war from the past. Does that mean we could win? The whisperings from the gathered lizard men grew louder and louder. Everyone within the hut talked about the plausibility of Zayusu's suggestion, but Shasuryu remained silent. He did not seem like he was going to speak. Zayusu did not dare look his brother, and that gaze of his which seemed to see through his thoughts in the eye. After enough time had passed for everyone to discuss the matter, Zayusu spoke again. I hope you don't get the wrong idea. What I mean is for us to ally with all the tribes. Say what? The headhunter, who was the second person present to realize what he was getting at, exclaimed in surprise. Zayusu stared intently at Shasuryu, and every lizardman in their way cleared a path for them. I would suggest forming an alliance with the Dragon Tusk and the Red Eye tribes as well, Chief. That bombshell sent ructions through everyone present. They had not had any prior dealings with the Dragon Tusk and Red Eye tribes, and they had abstained from fighting during the tribal war. In addition, the Dragon Tusk had taken in the survivors of the Yellow Speckle and Sharp Edge tribes, so it made sense to consider them a potentially problematic tribe in future. Still, if they could ally with those 2 tribes, it would form a 5-tribe alliance. If it worked out, they might have a chance to survive. Just as everyone dared hope for that, Shasuryu asked tersely, "Who will be our envoy?" "Let me go." Zayusu's prompt answer did not startle Shasuryu. He knew Zayusu well, and in all likelihood, he had already anticipated an answer like this. The lizard men around them murmured about how there was no better candidate for this, but one person expressed his dissatisfaction. Sending a traveler. It was Shasuryu. His icy cold gaze pierced Zayusu. That's right, Chief. This is an emergency, and if the other side won't hear me out because I'm a traveler, then they're not worth allying with. Zayusu returned the cold stare. After looking at each other for a while, Shasuryu smiled sadly. Perhaps he had given up on his brother, or on persuading him from his course, or he had already acknowledged that he was the best man for the job, but it was a genuine, unclouded smile. Take the chief's seal with you. The seal symbolized that the bearer acted with the chief's authority, and it was not something a traveler could be allowed to possess. Several members of the Elder Council made to speak, but they withered under Shasuryu's keen glare and swallowed their words. Thank you very much. Zayusu bowed deeply in thanks. After that, Shasuryu continued. I will appoint our envoys to the other tribes. First. Night fell, and with it came a cool breeze. The humidity and heat made the marshlands feel oppressively hot, but once night came, that feeling slowly subsided. In fact, once the night winds blew, it even felt a little chilly. Of course, these changes in the weather meant nothing to the lizard men and their thick hides. Zayusu padded along the marsh, headed for his pet Ro's home. While there was still some time, an emergency might crop up. In addition, there was no guarantee that the enemy might stick to their agreement, and they might do something to impede Zayusu. After considering these factors, Zayusu came to the conclusion that riding Ro out was the best course of action. The sound of Zayusu's footsteps slowed down, and eventually they stopped. He carried a pack filled with all manner of items, which shuddered mightily as he ground to a halt. The reason why he had stopped was because he saw a familiar-looking lizardman emerge from behind Ro's hut, under the moonlight. They exchanged glances, and then the black-scaled lizardman tilted his head in puzzlement at the stationary Zayusu. Then he closed the distance between them. I've always felt that you ought to have been chief. This was the first thing that Zayusu's elder brother Shasuryu had said since he had approached him. What are you saying, Aniya? Do you remember the war? Of course. Zayusu had been the one who had brought it up before the tribe. How could he not remember? Then, he realized that Shasuryu had probably been thinking the same thing as well. Do you know how much I regretted branding you when you became a traveler after the war? I thought that I should have tried to stop you, even if I had to do so by force. Zayusu shook his head. His brother's face from back then was still stuck deep in his heart. But because you granted me permission to be traveler, I could return after learning how to farm fish. You could probably have figured out a way to do that by staying in this village. A smart man like you ought to be leading this. Aniya. One could not take back the events of the past. Therefore, talking about maybes was meaningless at this point. Still, were they discussing these matters because they were actually weak inside? No, that could not be. I'm telling you this, not as the tribe's chief, but as your brother. I'm not going to ask, will you be all right by yourself? But you must come back safely. Don't push yourself too hard. Zayusu smiled at those words. Of course. I'll come back after completing my mission. It ought to be easy. Shasuryu went, moo, and then smiled bitterly. So if you fail, I'll be helping myself to the fattest fish in your farm, then. Aniya, that sort of thing doesn't bother me. And really, saying things like that at this juncture doesn't make you look strong at all. Moo. And then, the two of them smiled. Eventually, they looked at each other again, with serious expressions on their faces. Then, are your intentions merely to secure an alliance? What are you saying? What are you trying to say? Zayusu's eyes narrowed, and then he thought, crap. Given his brother's keen insight, his reaction just now was very bad for him. You seem to be holding something back during the meeting. It was almost as though you were trying to guide everyone's thoughts. Shasuryu continued speaking to the dumbfounded Zayusu. I believe that one of the reasons for that war was because the petty disputes between each tribe went away and the number of lizard men increased. Aniyah, please don't say any more. Zayusu's iron tones only seemed to lend credence to Shasuryu's words. So, that was it. It's the only way to keep the war like that from happening again. Zayusu spoke those words with a hint of resignation in his voice. He felt his scheme was a wicked and despicable one. If possible, he would like to have kept it from his brother. Then, what do you plan to do if the other tribes refuse an alliance? There's no way we can compete with them if our people have been depleted by flight and warfare. If that happens, we'll have to eliminate them first. So we're going to start by killing our own people. Aniyah. As he heard the pleading note in Zayusu's voice, Shasuryu laughed, as though he thought nothing of it. I understand. There's nothing wrong with your way of thinking. In fact, I agree with it too. The leader of a tribe must concern themselves with the survival of their tribe, so don't worry, brother. Thank you. Then, shall I bring the other tribes to our village? No. If that monster was telling the truth, our village will be the second target. So in all likelihood, the fiercest fighting will occur at the first village to be attacked. Under normal circumstances, it would be best to gather at one of the later targets or at a more defensible village. However, if our villages are burned down, life after the war will be very hard for us. Therefore, it would be best to make our stand at the first village to be attacked. As for communications, I'll ask the High Priestess to keep in touch with you using magic, so could you guide the other leaders directly to the rendezvous point? I understand. It would be difficult to send a lot of information using the spell his brother had in mind, and it would not work at all if the distance between them was too great. It was a barely passable communication method. However, Zayusu felt that it would suffice, given the circumstances. Also, I'll be taking the fish in your farm as rations. Naturally. However, I hope you'll leave the fry and the young fish. The farm's just gotten on track recently, and even if we have to abandon the village, sparing the fry will help the farm in future. I promise you that. Then, how many people can those fish feed? If you include the dried ones, there should be enough for about 1,000 people. Is that so? Then our food problem will be solved for the time being. I'll leave that to you. Then, I'll be heading out. Aniyah. Row. A serpent head poked itself from the window in response to Zayusu's call. Its scales gleamed wetly in the pale moonlight. They sparkled faintly as their angle changed, producing a scene of phantasmal beauty. We're heading out. Can you come to me? Ro looked at Zayusu and Shasuryu, and then pulled its head back in. That was followed by a burbling and the sound of something heavy on the move. Then, Aniyah, I'd like to ask you something. How many people do you plan to evacuate? Depending on the circumstances, I may need to use that number as a negotiation tool. Shasuryu only hesitated for a moment before answering. 12 warriors, 20 hunters, 3 priests, 70 males, 100 females. And some of the children. I see. I get it. Zayusu fell silent after seeing Shasuryu's tired smile. Then, the sound of water splashing echoed through the oppressive atmosphere. The two of them looked to the sound source, and they smiled nostalgically. Moo. It's grown up pretty well. I was quite shocked when I entered its hut. Same here, Aniyah. I didn't think it'd get so big. After all, it was pretty small when I found it. I find that hard to believe. After all, it was already quite big by the time you brought it back to the village. Just as the two of them reminisced over the way Ro looked when it was young, 4 serpentine heads popped out of the water near the hut. They approached Zayusu and Shasuryu. Just then, the serpent head suddenly reared up, revealing a massive form hidden within the water. Its 4 reptilian heads were joined to its body by long necks, and said body had 4 legs. It was a magical beast, a hydra. That was the name of Ro's species. It was no simple snake, given the fact that it made chewing noises when Zayusu had tossed it fish. Ro was 5 meters long, but it was a nimble navigator, and soon made its way to Zayusu's side. Like a monkey climbing a tree, Zayusu gracefully clambered onto Ro's body. You must come back safely. Also, don't worry too much about things. Getting worked up and shouting, "I won't let anyone die today," is your style. It seems I've grown up a little now. Shasuryu snorted as he heard this. And so the brat has become a man who can stand on his own. Forget it. In any event, take care of yourself. If you don't return, then we'll know who to attack first. I'll come back safely. Wait for me, Aniya. After that, the two of them looked at each other, their eyes brimming with emotion, and then they parted ways.